So I'm joined today with the great pleasure of being able to talk to author and writer uh, Dr. Andrew Abela about your new book, Super Habits, which I've been reading over the last few days. And before we get into this, would you like just to give us a brief overview of who you are, a little bit about your work, and how you came to arrive to writing this book?
Sure, sure. I serve as the Dean of the Bush School of Business at the Catholic University of America. Catholic University of America is the only university in the United States that is owned directly by the Catholic Church. There are over 200 Catholic colleges and universities in the United States, but each one of them is owned by a diocese or by a religious order, the Jesuits or the Holy Cross Fathers and so on. We're the only one owned directly by the church. So we're the church's university in the United States, and the Bush School is the church's business school in the United States.
Okay.
And we strive to educate our students to form them in virtue. So the purpose of our business school is to teach and study what it means to be a faithful Catholic in business. And so I think it was a natural thing for me to draw from what we had been doing in the classroom to write a book about virtue, which is what this book is about. Yeah.
Yeah. um, because this is a kind of a topic in business that is kind of left to the fringes. I mean, in business, we're very good at compliance with laws, okay, we have to treat people fairly and all the legal side of employment and employment law. But bringing what you're bringing into business is a very rare um, it's a very rare occurrence, really, to try and bring virtue into business because it's not actually detailed out. Is how long was this long in the works, or is this
Yeah.
something that?
Oh yeah, many years. I started working on the research for this book without a clear idea of what the book was going to be, maybe 7 years ago. So it's been a
Hmm.
while. I started writing about a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer, kind of formally writing it. But the research took that many years. But it's worth, I think, clarifying that the book is about virtue, but it's not about ethics.
Yes.
And right, the difference being ethics is just about the sort of right and wrong, the morality, whereas virtue is about excellence, and that includes moral excellence, but not just that. So if you were using this in a business, it wouldn't just or even primarily be about making sure there was nothing unethical going on. It would be primarily be about making the business thrive in all its dimensions, which means be more productive, have a happier workforce, be more profitable, like lots of good outcomes. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I was pleasantly surprised when I started reading the book that you bring in the Irish conflict, the troubles, and you have that example there at the beginning. What made you draw from that? Because I found it, as an Irishman, very powerful start of the book.
Well, that's a great compliment. Thank you. I was I decided to start working on the chapter on the virtue of restraint without the idea that it would be the first chapter in the book. And so I was looking for a story that showed somebody displaying the virtue of restraint and having a significant impact on society. And I found the story of Mary Corrigan. Do I pronounce the name correctly?
Yep.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
Mary. Okay, good. And I thought, well, this is a brilliant story. And the more I read into it and I read the newspaper articles from that time and so on, I realized this would be a good way to actually start the book. I have to say, I actually cried several times while writing the chapter. It was such a moving story, Yeah, about the loss of her three nieces and nephew, and then her sister taking her life, and then how she just kind of marched right into the TV station and kind of made this call for restraint. Yeah, it's a beautiful story.
It is. It's very poignant, very, very, very moving. And there's not just that story. There's many of those similar stories that happened. I remember in the Oma bombing, you have a similar case where I think it was a Protestant pastor. He loses his daughter, and he goes on to be an incredible agent for peace. So it's great that you have captured on one of those stories that can we can bring into the book. Um, but you do a lot of storytelling. You've gone through every chapter. I was just because we go through the different super habits: restraint, humility, diligence, super habits versus super habits, and gentle firmness, forgiveness, orderliness, eutrapelia. Now that one was a fascinating chapter. I've never heard of it before. Maybe for our listeners, could you explain eutrapelia a little bit more for us?
Yes, eutrapelia it's a Greek word. We use it because we don't have an English or even a Latin word, and it is the virtue or the super habit of having good leisure.
Mhm.
And so all of this, all of the habits, all of the super habits, virtues, I get from St. Thomas Aquinas. And I
Okay.
think that's really important because I have read in this research many books written by faithful Catholics about virtue, about the virtues. And each of the books has a slightly or dramatically different list of virtues than the other books.
Yeah.
So you look at them and think, well, what am I supposed to do? Like it's almost like saying, I'm trying to repair my car, and each repair manual has a different set of parts. So how am I
Mhm.
supposed to grow in virtue if we can't even agree which are the virtues? So I was reading St. Thomas Aquinas, and I realized that he's not just giving a list of virtues, he actually gives an integrated system. And he has a way of showing that the virtues that he lists is the full and final set of virtues. There's nothing more and there's nothing
Yeah.
missing. And so I went with that because that to my mind is authoritative. And so he gives one of the virtues is eutropelia. And so because he gives you a comprehensive set of virtues, there is in effect in his system, and so in my book, a virtue for every aspect of life. So
Yeah.
whatever struggle you're having with life, there's going to be a virtue to make that part of your life easier and more effective. And so eutrophilia, I think, is particularly relevant to people who struggle with workaholism.
Hmm.
And I don't talk much about myself in the book, but I make an exception in that chapter because as a younger man, I was a great workaholic to the
Hmm.
exclusion of anything else. And it made my life miserable. And I just by accident I stumbled on eutropelia. I didn't even know the name of it back then. Um, but Aquinas explains why this virtue it's the virtue of having a restful time through good leisure, you know. So whether you go for a hike or whether you're listening to good music or just having pleasant conversation with friends or a nice meal, you know, the main thing is it's something that you're doing for its own sake
Hmm.
because modern society, we spend so much time trying to achieve things. And so when we read, it's for self-improvement. And when we go out, it's to network. You know, it's always something we go to the gym in order to become healthier or better looking. There's always some goal that we're shooting for towards. And the problem is that can just be exhausting. So St. Thomas has this beautiful line that I quote in the book where he says, enjoyment is rest for the soul,
Okay.
which is a lovely line because the point is if you are physically tired, then all you have to do is stop moving, lie down, sit down, and you will rest. But if you are mentally or psychologically or spiritually tired, if your soul is exhausted, it there's no simple way to, like sitting down, stopping doesn't stop your mind from spinning. We know we've
Mm.
had this experience, right? Even when we're sleeping, our minds are spinning. That's what dreams are and REM sleep and so on. So what Aquinas points out is that the way to really rest your mind or rest your soul is do something enjoyable
Mm.
because our brains are purpose-seeking organs and they only stop seeking when they rest on something fun. So if you
Yes.
are having a pleasant walk, then your mind can just sort of rest and just enjoy the pleasure of that walk. Hence, enjoyment is rest for the soul is line. So that whole chapter is about that. And the reason I use stories in that chapter and in every chapter is I I didn't want people to be bored.
No.
And to be very truthful, the first chapter I wrote, I gave to my wife to read, and she said, "This is boring." And I thought, no one's going to read a boring book. Life is hard enough without forcing people to read boring books, and they're not going to do it anyway. So I thought,
Yeah.
let me see if I can write this in a way that would be fun and enjoyable to read, you know?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I had a lot of fun finding the stories and writing them, and then even rereading them myself, you know, and I've had got good feedback from others. But what I tried to do in each case was pick a story that not only would you enjoy reading the story, but it would help you understand the concept of each virtue.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was I found it very engaging because sometimes you go through these type of books in the business world and they can be very dry, whereas I mean, as an Irishman, I was immediately drawn into the book. I said, "Oh, I'm going to remember this chapter." It just you're painting a picture in each chapter, but obviously I'm going to remember the first chapter instantly, and I think that's a rare quality when we're trying to give a message as Catholics and forming other Catholics, because you did something I thought was interesting. You started forming hearts. Okay, my heart is engaged with a book here, which is a rare ability that some people have to do, and I think this is something transformative that can be used in the business world. You know, because I'm in business for 23 years in with the in an American corporate sector, and you know, sometimes it can be very clinical in the settings, you know, very hurtful. You know, people that you work with for decades, suddenly from one day to the next, they're gone without much care for how they are personally treated. And, you know, and you had a brilliant chapter there on the different commanders of submarines and how one was controlling and how the other set guidelines. And he says, look, I've set you some guidelines. You're free to make decisions as you like, but respect these lines in the sand, which I thought brilliant examples that you're giving. um is this something that needs to be like taught in business schools from the start, or an addendum? How do we incorporate this in?
What we're trying to do in our school is integrate it into every class. So every
Mm,
class we're teaching, there's a conversation about which virtues are in play here, which are necessary. I think this would be such a big benefit for businesses to incorporate. And I think it will happen
mm,
because as businesses start to adopt this, they'll actually be more successful and more profitable. So there's that incentive alone, I think, is going to encourage businesses. So I've started to do workshops for companies. Um, because you think about it, if your employees could be more self-disciplined, more creative, more courageous, more friendly, more generous, more grateful, these are all virtues, you know, wouldn't the business be more successful? Of course it would, you know. So it just seems almost obvious to me that we should try to do this. But I think what has happened is, and the reason I call this book super habit is a word that I made up that means virtue, because a virtue is
yeah.
a habit of excellence, and a superpower kind of habit of excellence, a special kind of habit of excellence. But the reason I came up with that word is I had good guidance from friends of mine in business that if I called the book Virtue, no business person would buy it. It's sad, you know? But
Yes.
not because they're against virtue as we're discussing it, as in habits of excellence, but because they think virtue is something else. You know, they think, like we said before, they think virtue is merely um, excessively moralistic,
Yeah.
judgmental, and so on, rather than a habit of excellence. So I could either do the work of trying to tell people that they're wrong about what they mean by virtue, or I could just invent another word and reintroduce the concept to them, which is what I'm trying to do. So.
Yeah, and you did it extremely well. I think it really does sell the it draws people into this way of working. I mean, when you talk about forgiveness, and that's sometimes a hard topic. But I've been in work situations where people do not forgive each other.
Yeah.
There's no, and I'm not talking to that person, and you can feel the whole atmosphere in the office is very tense, and what is needed is to bring two people into the room and say, look, I forgive you and you forgive me, and look, and try and move on. But it doesn't, and then the whole work structure suffers. There's a
Yes.
grating. There's nobody wants to learn from each other. And at some point, one or other person will leave the team because
Yeah.
forgiveness. And you're detailing it out there in a very, very practical way for businesses to look at.
It's yeah, if you remember in the forgiveness chapter, I actually connect forgiveness with innovation as well.
Mm. Yes.
People are surprised by that, but there's actually research that shows this, that if a boss isn't forgiving, it makes sense, right? His employees or her employees aren't going to be very innovative because they don't want to take any risks because they're
Correct.
afraid of their boss. But if the boss is forgiving of mistakes, then that doesn't mean that there's a breakdown in discipline. It just means people may try more things, and you need that if you want
Yeah.
innovation.
Yeah. Actually, that's a principle that Tim Cook and Apple took very, very well, because they allow for a lot of failure in development in order for what you put on the market to be perfect. So they're very forgiving in their R&D and their research and development, and things and they want that in order to have a great product on the market. And you captured it exactly in that chapter. You said that exactly, and I thought that was a very interesting connection. So it was.
Good.
Um, just on there was another one here I thought was interesting. Practical wisdom. What? How would you expand that chapter out, or
Sure, sure. Yes. So it's not just the word virtue, but many of the names of the virtues have lost their meaning or have had their meaning twisted. And so practical wisdom is another word for the virtue of prudence.
Mhm.
And what it means is it's the habit of making good decisions, making wise decisions. Um, but when you hear the word prudence, you don't think wise decisions. You think somebody who's afraid to move or just kind of um, prissy, so so
Yeah.
so so, um, so I use that's why I use the word practical wisdom. Aquinas breaks it up into eight virtues, or he calls them partial. That doesn't really matter, but the eight separate virtues that you need if you're going to make good decisions. You have four that are all about gathering the information that you need. Then one virtue called reasoning, that's about kind of the logic, analyzing that data. And then there are three separate virtues for making sure that your decision gets implemented. Because Aquinas says very wisely, 750 years ago, that if the decision is not implemented, then it's not really made. A lot
No.
of people make decisions and then don't act on them. May as well not have made it in the first place. And so I have a chapter on practical wisdom as a whole, and I go through all eight of those chapters, or eight of those virtues. And the story I tell is one from New York City, 2009, was the crash landing of United Flight 1549 on the Hudson River. And the
Mhm.
pilot, Captain Sullenberger. And what I do is I went through the accident report. And so I go minute by minute, second by second, all the many decisions he had to make in order for that plane to land safely. I think most people, I certainly, when I started doing the research, I just assumed that landing a plane on water was not that different or that difficult from landing on land because you just kind of skim. Apparently, it is so much more difficult that the vast majority of airplane landings on water involve total loss, like everybody dies or most people die, because the slightest, the plane is slightly off, tip of the wing gets caught or whatever, the whole thing tumbles, explodes, it's a disaster. So for him to actually land there and all the decisions about where should he land, could he land there? It's January in middle of winter, so the water is freezing cold. If the people fall in the water, they would die in 20 or 30 minutes. So what I did was I showed all the decisions he had to go through, all the different parts, the different virtues that make up practical wisdom, and then I tied them back to his biography to show how throughout his life he was growing in these multiple different virtues. So when this moment of testing came, he saved the lives of everyone on the plane because he had been preparing this virtue of practical wisdom. And I point out that we never know if when we'll be tested in that way. But the only way to prepare is to try to grow in virtue every day, so that
Yes.
then when we're called upon to do it, we're ready.
Yes, yes, yes. I thought it was a beautiful the way you weaved it all in, and I didn't fully capture how much of St. Thomas Aquinas you had actually brought into that book, which is going to be a revelation for a lot of Catholics.
Well, I wanted the book to be accessible to anybody.
It was.
Regardless of their faith background, I wanted anybody to have access to this because as you grow in virtue, I think you also grow in openness to faith. So
Yeah.
I didn't want anybody to be turned off by this. I wanted anybody who wanted to read it. So I didn't go throughout it saying St. Thomas said this and St. Thomas said that. But in the footnotes, it's all there, just
Yes.
showing how every aspect, everything I do is is grounded both in Thomas and in modern psychological research, which basically confirms everything he said 750 years ago.
Yes.
I'm very, very convinced of the truth of everything I'm writing because you've got these
Yeah.
two really powerful sources, agreeing
Yeah.
with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
Okay. And then we have you also have the chapter on the super habit system. What exactly led you to put in that chapter as a super habit system? Is this what was the reasoning behind it?
I wanted to explain to the readers why I can say with confidence that the super habits listed in the book is a complete set. As you, I think you have the Kindle book version,
I
right? The
do.
electronic version. So in the hardcover version, every copy comes with I have one here, a poster
Ah,
of the wheel of the virtues, which is my design, but it's St. Thomas's structure. And
okay.
so I think you have a picture of it in yours, but you don't actually. The book, the hardcover comes out with a big fold-out version that I just showed you. Um, and the what the chapter on the super habit system does is it shows how I mentioned before that different books about virtues come up with different lists. What I do in that chapter is show how St. Thomas came up with his and how they all fit together and how there's nothing missing and there's no overlap and it's all integrated. I don't start the book with that because I don't want people to get sort of into too much detail. I start with individual virtues, and after you've seen a few of them, then I say, okay, and this is how it all fits together. So that what the book is, what I call it the anatomy of virtue, what the wheel graphic combined with the book is, in a sense, it's a map of a successful human life, a flourishing human life. I don't know if you have this in Ireland, but here in the US, people use the phrase, what would Jesus do? You know,
Hmm.
so when you want trying to decide what to do, what would Jesus do? And it's good to pray about what I should do, but sometimes you need something more concrete than that. And the more concrete is understand the particular virtue that would apply in this particular situation. And if you want to know what Jesus would do, he would act virtuously. So
Yes.
the book is a kind of a handbook. One of the jokes I make is the book is written in the style of a self-help book.
Hmm.
But the joke is this is the last self-help book you'll ever need because it
Yeah.
just covers everything. Obviously, I'm exaggerating. There are other books one should read, but it really does give you a comprehensive map of what a flourishing human life looks like.
Yeah. I hate self-help books. So when I
Ah,
when I when I saw this book, um, and I was thinking, oh, is this another self-help book? And then I read through it and I said, oh, this is nowhere near a self-help book. Well, it resonated really, really, really well with me, as I said from the very start. And it captures you capture the mind, You're tugging a mind into a scenario and say, look at this scenario and now look at this scenario and how that works. I thought that was a very good grasp of how we can engage with these super habits.
Good. Yes, thank you. I had some nice reviews of the book in the front of the book, and the one that I really like is a pseudonym of writer N.S. Lyons. He goes by this name, and he wrote, "This is a work of deep philosophy masquerading as a self-help book." And I rather like that. I thought that was a double compliment. It's like so yeah. I did intend to write it so that it read and felt like a self-help book with the kind of that could be read with that same kind of ease. But
Yes.
hopefully it also has a great depth to it.
It
So
does, it does, and as I said, it's very readable, very enjoyable to read. And it's something that I will reference. I would go back and reference and use and in our work. You could take this out and actually use examples in the workplace in a very simple way. Do you know what I mean?
yes, yeah. And as I say, I originally started writing it as a manual. But then I
Okay.
realized no one's going to read a manual, but it's still the structure of it is still such that you can use it as a reference as well, because as it goes through each of the super habits, as it's telling stories, it lets you know, not just, as you saw, not just the science behind each super habit, what we know scientifically, but also some tips for how do you start out with that. And in addition to that, towards the end of the book, there is a QR code that links to an app. So we actually have a
Okay.
super habits app, which you don't even need to buy the book to get it. It's free on the internet. Superhabits.app.app is the location. And when you go to it, you put in your phone number. I think it should work in Ireland.
Yeah.
And it works through text. So it first you do a survey, and as a result of the survey, it rates you on all the super habits and tells you where you're strong and where you could improve. And then you pick one you want to improve, and it'll text you each day to remind you. It first will help you choose a specific practice, a simple practice, and then will text you each day to remind you and ask you if you did it. And then it will keep track of the streaks, and then it'll help you evolve and so on. It's pretty powerful. We're still experimenting with it, but it's out there,
Yeah.
available. I use it every day. And it's a nice addendum, I think, to the book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because in work we do different types of formation. I remember once as a team, we went through like a character analysis of everybody in the team. So doing an anonymous survey and then random questions, and then they present you, well, this is the type of character you are, and I remember coming together and saying, well, Robert works like this, and this person works like this, and Robert will make decisions like this, and this person will make this. And I suppose, and then knowing how people acted, you can enhance their virtues that they're good at. Some people in the team are extremely good at problem solving and engaging with people, whereas others aren't. And I think this type of book as well, when you bring it into a team setting, and it'd be interesting to see how it could be rolled out, will actually drive people to think, well, look, you're going to have moments when there's going to be fraught situations here that you want to forgive. Have this habit in your mind, because you can't learn, we can't innovate if you don't forgive a mistake.
Yeah, yeah. What you can also do with the book and with the app is, you can use it so that a team can work together to try to grow in a particular virtue together, whether it's forgiveness or generosity, or because the virtues tend to be contagious. So,
Yes.
so, people can grow in them together much more rapidly than alone.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we actually have a new feature on the app where you can create a group. So you can have your work group and invite your colleagues to join. And then it'll give you, it only discloses what you're best at. It doesn't talk about so that part is private. But then you can agree on a virtue that you all want to work on. And then it will give you daily updates. And it's a
Yeah.
good incentive to make sure that you keep up with the virtue, because it's kind of like a competition then, make sure everyone
Yeah.
else keep up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that can help as well.
It does, it does, and once you like, once you foster these in a team, say humility or gentleness or orderliness, like some of these virtues, like you could be working teams where nobody wants to help each other or nobody wants to cover on a holiday, or you can work in a team where, look, everybody wants to get mucked in, everybody wants to help. It's a different culture, something that I've noticed with the people that I work with. They always find the our team has a very unique culture of looking after each other. Said, "Oh, I didn't experience this in other places," and it's exactly what you said. It's contagious. It's the people, it spreads out.
Yeah, yeah, very much so, very much so.
Okay. So I'm going to put a link to where we can get the book, and I'm going to put a link then to your app as well. If people get the hard copy, I think we get the extended poster and we get the
Correct.
QR code. Okay, so
Yeah.
everything is in the book. Um,
Yeah, the QR code should be in the Kindle version as well, towards the back. But if
okay.
not, then you just have to type in superhabits.app,
Yeah.
and
No.
take you to it
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. No. It is. It is. I have it here. It is
Oh,
here.
there it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's the
And
yeah.
and the And there is the wheel that you were mentioning that folds out. So
Yes.
everything is in the Kindle version. So
Good, good.
perfect. Is there any other books that you recommend? Is this just one in a series, or can we expect more work like this?
So I've written 3 books in my life, and they are 10 years apart.
Okay.
So I'm not sure when I would do the next one, maybe 10 years from now. But I do write on Substack, which is kind of like a blogging platform or newsletter platform, and it's superhabit.substack.com. In that case, it's superhabit singular, not like the book. Superhabit. And so there, about once every week or two, I write some additional material, and then every day I try to write on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And there I have connections with people all around the world, and I try to post video or some comments on the different virtues, and I'm trying to build sort of a community around that. And the people search for my name, Andrew Abela, on LinkedIn. It needs to come up, and I love connecting with people, so they can follow or connect. And so that's kind of for other material. When I'll get around to another book, I don't know. So
And do you mind? Would you, are you free to give workshops to leadership teams if people reach out to you?
yes, I do that. I am very limited in the amount of time, because I do have my
Mhm.
main job is running the business school, but I
Yeah.
do on occasion, and so I'd be happy to hear from people. The best way to reach me is through my email,
Mhm.
and so you can share that as well. It's abela@cua.edu. So ABELA at CUA, stands for Catholic University of America.edu. So people can email me for that. And we can do those over Zoom, of course, for distance. But if it's a big enough organization, then I travel as well for that. So
Okay. Yeah.
yeah.
Because I do think it's well worth investing time in fostering this in a business. If you get the fundamentals right, profit follows. But if a team is not working, if there's no forgiveness, if there's no gentleness, if there's no innovation happening, if people are afraid, I've been burnt once because I was generous. I was burnt, and then you stifle innovation. And I think once you bring out what you're doing here, it definitely will fall. It definitely will grow profits. You said it at the
Yeah.
start of this interview. So I think it's a very good. it's a very good idea. Um, Doctor, thank you so much for taking the time to go through your book. And we just skimmed through it here. But as I said, I'm going to put a link to your book below, and I do encourage people to read it. I think in Ireland it should get a lot of good reception because you really have. I mean, once I read Restraint, that first chapter, I was wow. There's never this is a chapter I am not going to forget, and I think I th and I'm fascinated how you've interlaced everything with Saint Thomas Aquinas, and maybe that's something an interview in itself to go through Saint Thomas Aquinas and the interlace in this. So.
Yeah, yeah, it's there's so much depth in his writing. It was a real delight to try to bring it out to a new audience, you know. So yeah.
I think you're the first person that has done this in the business world to bring Thomas Aquinas to the business world. Is there anybody else who's done this?
I'm not aware of anybody. Although, I mean, prior to this book, I would use Aquinas to teach things like private property and just price and these things because he's so thoughtful on these questions. But yeah, so well, I've been happy to do it. So
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Anyway, thank you so much, and
my
we're looking
pleasure. Thanks
forward
for having
to.
me on your show. So
Thank you.
God bless.
God
Bye bye.
bless. Bye.